My wife cheated on me and blamed me for working too much. I used to think I was building a life. Turns out I was building an alibi. Every morning I left before the sun had fully decided to show up. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other. And my wedding ring doing that quiet little sparkle like it was cheering me on. My name is Evan, and for years my schedule looked like a ransom note made of meetings, deadlines, late-night calls, and that special kind of silence you only get when you unlock your front door and nobody asks how your day was. I told myself it was temporary, just until the promotion, just until we bought the house, just until we had breathing room. My wife Lena used to wait up for me. At first she would sit on the couch with a blanket, and a show paused, like she was holding the whole evening in place until I arrived. Then she started going to bed. Then she started going to bed with the lights off. Then she started going to bed, and I could not even tell if she was asleep or just pretending she was not disappointed. Which honestly is a talent I never mastered. One night I dropped my keys too loudly, and she said from the bedroom, "Keep it down." Like I was a stranger who rented a room, I stood in the hallway feeling ridiculous in my suit, holding a takeout bag that smelled like the office microwave, and I thought, okay, tomorrow I will fix this, which is what people say when they want to feel responsible without changing anything. The next day I brought flowers, because men are taught that flowers are a shortcut to being emotionally available. Lena smiled, thanked me, put them in water, and never looked at them again. Later she said, "Evan, I do not want gifts. I want you." I laughed a little because I did not know what else to do, and that laugh was my first real mistake. Not the long hours, not the missed dinners, the laugh. It told her I was not hearing her. It told her she was speaking a language I did not respect. I still hear it sometimes when I am trying to fall asleep, like an old voicemail you cannot delete. A few weeks after that, we went to a friend's birthday dinner. I promised I would not check my phone. I even put it face down like that was a heroic act. And for the first hour I was present. I really was. I listened. I joked. I touched Lena's hand under the table and she looked at me with that warm, surprised expression, like she had just found a version of me she thought had moved away. Then my screen lit up. Just once. A message from my boss. And before I could stop myself, I glanced. Then I typed. Then I stood up and took a call outside the restaurant. The air was cold and sharp. My boss was talking numbers and risk and timelines, and I nodded into the phone like nodding could change math. When I came back in, Lena was smiling, still smiling, but it did not reach her eyes anymore, and she did not touch my hand again. Later in the car she said, "You chose them again." And I said, "It was just one call." And she said, "It is never just one call." And I said, "Do you want me to lose my job?" And she stared out the window and said, "I want you to be my husband." Then she went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the room is holding its breath. After that, she started changing small things. She joined a gym that was farther away, even though there were 3 closer ones. She bought a new water bottle that looked like it belonged to someone who had plans. She started wearing perfume on regular days. Not a lot. Just enough that when I hugged her goodbye, I smelled it and felt like I had missed a memo. I asked her about the gym. She said it helped her clear her head. I said, "Good, proud husband" voice, like I was supporting her. She said, "Yeah, it is good to have something that is mine." And there was a pause on the word mine that felt like a door clicking shut. I told myself it was normal. Couples do their own things. Healthy independence, all that. I even said it out loud to a coworker named Troy who was divorced and always acted like marriage was a subscription. "You forget to cancel," Troy said. "Independence is great until it is an exit strategy." And I laughed, because Troy always said something dramatic. I laughed again. Second mistake. Maybe the universe was trying to teach me through repetition. Then came the Thursday night that rewired my brain. I got home early. Early for me meant 9. I had stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients to cook, because I had seen a video where a guy made pasta and his girlfriend cried happy tears, and I thought, yes, I will be the pasta guy. I will be the husband who makes an effort. I unlocked the door and the apartment was too quiet. Not sleeping quiet. Empty quiet. Lena's coat was not on the hook. Her shoes were not by the mat. And on the counter was a sticky note in her neat handwriting. "At the gym, back soon." I stared at it for a long time like it might add extra words if I concentrated. I started chopping onions anyway because I had momentum and the confidence of a man with a tutorial bookmarked. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. The pasta water boiled down and hissed. And I checked my phone. No messages. I called Lena, straight to voicemail. I told myself her phone was in a locker. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of things that night, because telling myself things was easier than admitting I did not know where my wife was. When she finally walked in, it was almost midnight. She looked startled to see me standing there, like she had forgotten the apartment came with a husband. She said, "Oh, you are home." And I said, "Yes, I am home." And I kept my voice calm because I was not going to be the guy who yells. I was going to be the guy who communicates. She set her bag down, avoided my eyes, and said, "Sorry, the gym ran late." Then she added, "We grabbed smoothies after," and something in my chest tightened at the word we. I said, "Who is we?" And she blinked twice like she was buying time. Then she said, "Just some people from class." And I nodded, still calm, still communicating. And I said, "Okay, what class?" And she opened her mouth, then closed it, then said, "Spin." And I said, "You do not do spin." And she said, "I do now." And the way she said it sounded like a challenge, like she wanted me to argue so she could justify something. And that is when I noticed her hair, not messy workout hair, but brushed, and her lipstick, not heavy, but there, and a faint scent that was not her usual perfume. It was cleaner, like hotel soap. My brain tried to make a joke. Of course she is cheating. She upgraded to spa-scented betrayal, but the joke died fast. Because Lena looked at me, and there was something in her face I had not seen before. Relief mixed with guilt. Like she had been holding a secret, and her arms were getting tired. I said, "Lena, talk to me." And she swallowed and said, "Evan, I cannot do this alone anymore." And my heart started to beat slower, heavier, like it was bracing itself. I said, "Alone? What do you mean alone?" And she whispered, "I have been alone for years," and then her phone buzzed on the counter. She flinched. I did too, because the screen lit up and the name on it was not mine. It was a man's name, and I am not going to lie. My brain did that thing where time stretches, where you notice tiny details like the reflection of the screen in the knife I was still holding, where the whole world becomes a close-up shot. The name said, "Marcus," and the message preview said, "You okay?" And Lena reached for the phone too fast, like a kid grabbing candy they were not supposed to have. And I realized the suspense I had been living in was not at the office. It was in my own home. And I was the last person to read the script. I set the knife down slowly, not dramatic, just careful. And I said, "Who is Marcus?" And Lena's face went pale. And she said, "Evan, please." And that word "please" was not a request. It was a warning. Like if she explained, something would finally break. And I stood there with onions on the cutting board, pasta ruined in the pot, and my whole future hanging off one buzzing phone. And I understood, in the coldest, clearest way, that I might have worked too much. But somebody else had been clocking in to my marriage. Lena held her phone like it could bite. I did not reach for it. Not because I was noble, but because I knew if I touched it, my hands would start shaking. And I had spent too many years pretending I was steady. I said Marcus again. Slower, like saying the name carefully might keep it from cutting me. Lena looked at the floor and whispered, "He is just a friend," and I almost laughed. Not the office laugh, not the "I am fine" laugh, a real laugh. Because the word friend has become the duct tape of modern lies. I said, "Okay, then answer him. Tell your friend you are okay." Lena's shoulders tensed. She did not move. The phone buzzed again, and I saw the second preview. "I miss you." And there it was, the part where your brain stops trying to negotiate. I felt weirdly calm, like my emotions were stuck in traffic. I nodded toward the screen and said, "Friends do not usually say that." Lena's eyes filled up, and I waited for a confession, for a speech, for anything that resembled adult honesty. Instead, she said, "Evan, please do not do the whole interrogation thing." And I said, "The whole interrogation thing, Lena?" I walked into my own kitchen and found my wife starring in a mystery series. I am allowed to ask what season we are on. She winced at that. Like my sarcasm hit a bruise. She set the phone down face down, as if hiding it would change what I had already read, and she said, "I did not plan for this to happen." I said, "You never do you? You do not plan a fire. You just keep stacking dry wood until one day somebody lights a match." She rubbed her forehead and said, "I was lonely." And I felt that word like a slap because it sounded so simple. Like she was describing bad weather, I said. Lonely, with me in the same room. She looked up and there was anger behind the tears. She said, "You were never in the same room. You were here physically sometimes, but you were always elsewhere. In your phone, in your email, in your next promotion." She pointed at my suit hanging on a chair and said, "You love that life more than you love me." And I wanted to argue. I wanted to list every bill I paid, every weekend I gave up, every sacrifice I made. But then I realized what those lists always sound like, receipts, and nobody has ever felt loved by a spreadsheet. I said, "So Marcus is, what, your reward program?" And Lena's mouth trembled. She said, "Stop." And I said, "I will stop when you stop pretending this is just a friendship." Her face crumpled and she whispered, "It happened. Okay. It happened." And my chest went tight. Not in a dramatic way. More like someone had wrapped a belt around my lungs and pulled. I kept my voice even, I said. "How long?" She hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything about the kind of truth I was about to receive. She said, "A few months." And I nodded slowly. "A few months." Which in my world is one quarterly report. One budget cycle. One blink, I said. "And you meet him at the gym?" She shook her head, then nodded, then shook again, like her body did not want to commit to the lie anymore. She said, "He teaches one of the classes." I stared, and my brain did this annoying thing where it tried to picture Marcus, as if imagining his face would help. Like I could hate a jawline and feel better. I said, "So you pay money to go see him?" And she said, "It is not like that." And I said, "It is exactly like that. It is literally like that." Lena started crying in a quieter way. The exhausted kind. She said, "I tried to tell you. I begged you. I said I wanted you. And you kept saying tomorrow. You kept saying soon. You kept saying after this project, after this promotion, after we have more. And I got tired of waiting for a husband who lived in the future." I leaned back against the counter, and for a second I hated myself. Because part of me understood, and understanding is the most inconvenient emotion when you are trying to be righteously angry. I said, "So you replaced me." Lena shook her head fast. She said, "I did not want to replace you. I wanted you to show up, but you did not. And he did." And that sentence landed like a final stamp on a document. I looked at the half-cooked pasta, at the onions, at the sad attempt at romance, and I thought, "I came home early once and I still arrived too late," I said. "Do you love him?" Lena stared at me, and her silence felt like the answer even before she spoke. She said, "I do not know." And I said, "You know enough to let him text you at midnight." She whispered, "He makes me feel seen." And I almost said, "Congratulations. You found the bare minimum." But I swallowed it. Because I did not want to be the guy who punches down. I wanted to be the guy who stays upright even when the floor tilts. I said, "Are you still seeing him?" Lena looked away, and that was also an answer. I nodded, slow, like I was accepting a weather forecast. I said, "Okay. Then here is what is going to happen." Lena looked up quickly, like she expected me to explode. "I did not," I said. "You are going to tell him not to contact you while we figure out what we are doing. And if you cannot do that, then we already figured it out." Lena opened her mouth, then closed it. She said, "It is not that simple," and I said, "It is actually very simple, it just is not comfortable." She hugged her arms around herself and whispered, "You do not get to control me now just because you finally noticed me." And that stung because she was right. Noticing her now did not erase years of absence, but also her pain did not erase what she chose to do. I said, "I am not controlling you. I am setting my boundary. There is a difference." Lena stared, and I could see her trying to decide which version of me she was dealing with, the busy ghost husband, or the man standing in front of her who had finally stopped apologizing with flowers and started speaking in full sentences. She said, "I need time." And I said, "You already took time. Months of it. You took it from me without asking. Now I am taking my time back." She flinched, and the phone buzzed again, and this time Lena did not even pretend she did not care. Her eyes flicked to it like a magnet. I said, "Answer it," Lena whispered. "Evan, please," and I said, "Answer it on speaker." And her face went rigid, like I had asked her to walk into a spotlight. She said, "No," and I said, "Then pack a bag, because I will not sleep in a house with secrets buzzing on the counter." Her eyes widened, and she said, "You would throw me out," and I said, "I would protect myself." Lena reached for the phone, her hand hovering, trembling, and I realized the twist was not just that she had someone else. The twist was that she had become someone else. Someone who could look at me and still choose the buzzing. And before she could decide, the phone lit up with a call. Marcus calling, no text, a call, bold, confident, and Lena froze like a deer in headlights. And I knew, whatever she said next, my life was about to split into a before and after. And I still did not know the worst part, because in that moment my own phone vibrated too, and the notification on my screen was from an unknown number, and it said, "If you want the truth about your wife and Marcus, meet me tomorrow at noon alone." I did not show Lena the message. Not because I was protecting her, but because I needed one thing that night to belong only to me. She stared at my phone anyway, like she could sense gravity shifting. I slipped it into my pocket and said, "You should pack a bag," not angrily, not loudly, just factual, like I was stating the weather. Lena's mouth opened, closed. Then she said, "You cannot just decide that." And I said, "Watch me." Because something in me had finally stood up straight. She laughed once, sharp and defensive, and said, "Where am I supposed to go?" And I said, "Somewhere honest." She stared at me like I had switched languages. Then she went to the bedroom. Drawers opened and closed. The sound of a life being temporarily folded into a suitcase. I stayed in the kitchen and cleaned, because apparently that is my stress response. Wiping counters while my marriage dissolved. When she came back out, she looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a jacket like she was leaving in the middle of winter, even though it was not cold. She stood by the door and said, "I never wanted to hurt you." And I said, "Most people do not. They just want what they want more." She flinched, then said, "I will call you tomorrow." And I nodded, not trusting my voice. The door closed, and the apartment felt bigger and emptier at the same time. I slept on the couch, even though I was alone, because the bedroom felt like a crime scene. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit, made coffee for 2 out of muscle memory, poured one down the sink, and stared at my phone. The unknown message sat there like an unanswered riddle. I considered ignoring it, because meeting strangers who promise truth sounds like how bad decisions begin. But curiosity and dread teamed up, and one, I replied, "Where?" The answer came fast. Too fast. Downtown cafe near the river. I almost laughed at how dramatic it sounded, like the universe had a flair for staging. I went to work anyway, because of course I did, but I could not focus. Every email felt like static, every meeting like a parody. My boss asked if I was okay, and I said, "Long night," which felt like the understatement of the year. At noon I left. Did not ask permission. Just walked out. That alone felt like character development. The cafe was busy, all exposed brick and soft music. The kind of place people go to talk about books they have not finished. I ordered coffee I did not drink, and waited. I checked my watch twice. Then a woman sat across from me without asking. She was around my age, calm, eyes sharp. She said my name like she had practiced it. And I said, "You are." And she smiled thinly and said, "Someone who got tired of being lied to." I waited. She took a breath and said, "Marcus has a pattern," and there it was. The sentence that confirms you are not special. She told me she was his ex-girlfriend. Not angry, not dramatic, just done, she said. He liked married women, not because he wanted them, but because they were already halfway convinced they were unhappy. He listened, he mirrored, he validated, then he became indispensable. I felt sick in a very intellectual way, like my brain was nauseous. She said Lena was not the first, probably would not be the last. She slid her phone across the table, messages, nothing explicit, just emotional intimacy stacked like bricks. I did not read everything. I did not need to. I pushed the phone back and said, "Why tell me?" she said. "Because last time I stayed quiet, and I watched a family implode, and I decided I was done being a side character in other people's damage." I thanked her, genuinely. She nodded, stood up, and left without ceremony. No dramatic exit, just a truth delivered and gone. I sat there for a long time, then went back to work and finished the day like a robot who had learned one new fact about humanity: that attention is a currency, and some people counterfeit it well. That night, Lena called. I let it ring, then answered. She said, "I stayed at my sister's." I said, "Okay." She asked, "Did you think about what I said?" And I said, "I did, and I learned some things too." Silence. Then she said, "About us." And I said, "About you, about him, about me." She asked, "Are you going to forgive me?" And I realized how strange that question was. Like forgiveness was a switch she expected me to flip on schedule. I said, "I am not sure yet." She started crying, louder this time, and said, "I feel like I am losing you." And I said, "You already lost me when you decided I was optional." The line went quiet. Then she said, "That is not fair." And I said, "Neither is betrayal with a wellness aesthetic." She whispered, "He understood me." And I said, "No, he studied you. There is a difference." She did not argue, which told me she was starting to see it. But seeing something does not undo it, she asked, "Do you want to try counseling?" And for the first time, I did not immediately say yes. I said, "I want to try honesty first." And she said, "I am being honest." And I said, "Then block him, tonight." She hesitated again, and that hesitation was louder than any confession. I said, "Lena, this is the moment. Not tomorrow. Not after you feel ready. Now," she whispered. "I need time." And I closed my eyes and said, "Then we are done for now." She said my name like she was drowning, but I did not throw a rope made of excuses this time. I hung up. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from Marcus himself. Bold again, he said, "I think we should talk man to man." And I smiled, because nothing says manipulation like pretending this is a fair conversation. I typed back, "No," and blocked the number. And in that small act, I felt something return. Not happiness, not peace, but self-respect, which turns out is a decent place to stand when everything else is moving. I did not know what the future looked like yet. Reconciliation or divorce or something messier in between. But for the first time in years, I was not waiting for tomorrow to show up in my own life. I was already here. The days after felt unreal, like my life had buffering issues. Lena texted once a day, careful messages, thinking of you, hope you are okay. I replied politely and briefly, because kindness without clarity is just confusion with better manners. I took time off work, actual time, not laptop open pretend rest. I cleaned the apartment, not to erase her, but to remind myself I lived there too. I found old photos, trips we laughed on, versions of us that meant, well, I did not burn them or cry over them. I put them in a box. Memory does not have to be a courtroom. Sometimes it is just storage. One afternoon, Lena asked if we could meet. Neutral place, talk. I said yes. Not because I was hopeful, but because I was no longer afraid of the truth. We sat across from each other like polite strangers. She looked tired. Real tired. Not dramatic tired. She said she blocked Marcus. Showed me her phone without me asking. I nodded. Said thank you. She asked, "Is it too late?" And I answered honestly, "I do not know. But I know I will never compete for my own position again." And for the first time, she did not argue. She just nodded. And in that quiet moment, I understood. Whatever happened next, I had already changed. And I was not going back to the man who kept promising tomorrow. After that meeting, something strange happened. The urgency disappeared. Not because things were fixed, but because I stopped chasing an outcome. Lena kept checking in, careful and consistent, like someone learning a new language and afraid to mispronounce every word. She suggested counseling again. I said maybe, not as a weapon, but as a truth, because maybes are allowed when you are rebuilding trust. At work, I set boundaries that shocked everyone, including myself. I left on time. I said no without apologizing, and the world did not collapse. Turns out the company survived without my midnight emails. Who knew? Friends started asking questions. I told them the short version, no villain monologues, no self-pity, just facts. And I noticed something important. When I spoke calmly, people listened more. One evening, Lena admitted something she had never said before. She said Marcus was not exciting anymore once secrecy was gone. Once guilt faded, he was just a man repeating the same lines, and hearing that did not give me satisfaction. It gave me clarity, because it confirmed what I already knew. This was never about him being better. It was about him being available. She asked if I hated her. I said no, hate takes energy I now invest elsewhere. She cried softly, not dramatically, and said she hated herself for risking everything. I told her self-punishment is not growth. Accountability is. And for the first time, she did not ask me what to do. She asked what I needed, and that question mattered more than any apology. I said I needed consistency and time and the freedom to walk away if trust did not return. She nodded and said she would accept that. And whether we ended up together or not, I realized something quietly powerful. I was no longer negotiating my worth. I was offering space for change without surrendering myself, and that balance felt new, uncomfortable, and strong at the same time. The final decision came quietly. Not in a fight or a tearful scene, just a clear morning thought that refused to leave. I met Lena one last time and told her the truth without anger. I said, I forgive you, but I will not continue this marriage. Forgiveness is not a reset button. It is a release, she cried, and asked if anything could have changed it. And I answered honestly, yes, years ago, not now. I wished her well, meant it, and walked away feeling lighter. Not broken, work became just work. Not an escape. Life became fuller in smaller ways, dinners cooked and eaten warm, sleep without buzzing phones, peace without constant proving. I learned that love does not beg for presence, and commitment does not compete with attention. I did not lose my wife to another man. I found myself after losing myself to everything else, and that turned out to be the real win.